Dusty boots clacked against the weather-worn planks of the boardwalk as tumbleweeds danced across the empty street. The sun hung high and scorching, painting the sky a relentless gold. A sharp whistle cut through the desert hush, capturing attention like a bullet ricocheting off a tin can. That's when James McAllister first laid eyes on her, skinny as a rail hair, tangled with grit and sweat, sifting through the trash outside the Yellow Moon Saloon. He didn't know her name, didn't know her story, but something in the sorrow etched across her face sparked a fuse in his chest. He had no idea how his life would change that day. The small frontier town of Jericho Creek baked under the midday sun, the heat so thick it felt like invisible ropes clinging to everyone who wandered its dusty streets. James McAllister, a rancher-turned-blacksmith, had paused outside the Yellow Moon Saloon to wipe the sweat off his brow. He was a tall man, broad-shouldered with a slightly ragged beard that betrayed his many hours bent over a scorching forge. Like most days, he'd come into town to collect supplies. Fresh horseshoes, iron rods, nails, though that day he might have simply wanted a moment of quiet and a swig of cool water before heading back out. He had just tipped his hat at a passing deputy when he caught sight of her. A woman, barely more than a wisp of a figure, was crouching by the side of the saloon, rummaging through a bin of trash and scraps like a starved raccoon. Her dress was torn, the once fine material caked with dust and stained with who knew what. Her hair, presumably once carefully styled, was now a wild tangle that whipped across her face in the hot wind. James glanced up the street. No one seemed to notice or care about her predicament. He'd grown used to the harsh realities of frontier life. Men and women alike had to be tough to survive this far west. But something about her desperation struck him hard. Perhaps it was the trembling of her fingers as she picked through the discarded scraps of food. Perhaps it was her posture so drawn in upon itself that it looked as if she wanted to disappear into the rubbish. His heavy footsteps carried him toward her. As he approached, she flinched, eyes wide with alarm, poised to bolt. But James simply knelt down and offered his canteen of water. She stared at it for what felt like an eternity, before tentatively gripping the canteen with both hands. She drank like she'd wandered the desert for days. "Easy there," James said in a quiet voice, noticing the streaks of grime on her cheeks. "No need to rush. There's more water if you need it." At that moment, Wyatt Earp. Yes, the Wyatt Earp strode out of the saloon, coat-tails swishing behind him. He'd been passing through Jericho Creek after hearing rumors of gold out near the dry riverbed. Earp paused, squinted, and gave a tip of his hat in polite greeting, acknowledging James before continuing on his way. The famed lawman's presence in the dusty street seemed surreal. But James stayed focused on the woman before him. Once she'd had her fill, James offered her a hand. "Name's James McAllister," he said. "I work the forge in these parts. Let me help." Still skittish, she looked around, as though searching for an escape route. But the scorching sun, hunger and thirst seemed to weigh her down. Her small voice trembled. "Call me Elizabeth. Liz, if you like." James gave a nod. "All right, Liz. Let's get you some proper food and shade. Whatever's got you digging in trash, we'll figure it out." He helped her to her feet. In that moment, something shifted in the air, a quiver of fate. James didn't know then that this mysterious woman would be the pivot upon which his life would turn, drawing him into a whirlwind of secrets, lies, and eventual redemption that would shape the destiny of Jericho Creek. Together they made their way across the dusty street to the old diner next to the saloon, ignoring the stares from townsfolk who had finally taken notice. Little did they know the real storm was brewing just over the horizon. The Yellow Moon Saloon had seen its share of tragedy. Faded posters pinned haphazardly on its warped walls advertised traveling shows and wanted outlaws. The saloon's owner, Myrtle Donovan, known to locals simply as Mama Myrtle, had watched countless drifters pass through, leaving behind heartbreak trouble. Or both. Liz clung to James's arm like a leaf in a thunderstorm. She was raw-boned, and from the hollows under her eyes, James guessed she hadn't had a decent meal in days. The two of them found a booth at the diner. Wooden chairs scraped the floor, which was dusted with sawdust and peanut shells. The aroma of stew simmering in a large pot made Liz's stomach rumble audibly. She flushed with embarrassment. "Don't fret, ma'am," James said gently. "I've been hungry enough to eat grass myself." He motioned to the waitress. Sissy Walker, a bright-eyed girl of about 17, who arrived with a pitcher of water and took their order. James asked for 2 bowls of stew bread and strong coffee. He kept an eye on Liz, noticing how she rubbed her fingers together, as though trying to quell her nerves. When the food arrived, Liz devoured the meal with trembling gratitude. She paused only when James gently asked, "So how do you wind up here?" She swallowed hard, setting her spoon aside. "It's complicated," she began, voice cracking. "I came out west with a fiancé. We were supposed to get married in San Francisco, but on the way we stopped at a bigger town, St. Elmer, where he got pulled into a poker game. Gambled away every cent we had. He told me to wait, that he'd sort it out. Then he vanished." She blinked away tears. "Eventually I wandered here trying to find work, but nobody would hire me. No references, no family, no anything." James's jaw tightened. He knew how quickly fortunes could turn sour out in these parts. "That fella who left you, he got a name." Liz hesitated before answering quietly. His name was Vernon Gaffney. James recognized the name. Gaffney was known in certain circles as a smooth talker, with a knack for skipping town the moment debt collectors or angry losers wanted their money back. James had once seen him ousted from the Jericho Creek poker table at Mama Myrtle's for cheating. He's trouble incarnate, James thought, and now he's left her in the lurch. "Don't you worry," James said, patting her hand. "I've got a place you can stay my ranch, just a short ride from town. I've got some extra space in the bunkhouse. You're welcome for as long as you need." Liz's gaze snapped up. The flicker of hope in her eyes was tinged with suspicion. "Why would you do that for me?" James shrugged, fighting back a surge of emotion. "Because it's the right thing to do. My pa taught me you don't leave folks hungry in a trash pile when you've got a warm hearth to spare." Liz exhaled, shoulders sagging. "Thank you. Truly, I don't know how I can repay you. You can repay me by staying safe and getting back on your feet." He meant every word, but had no inkling how soon he'd need her to repay that kindness in ways neither of them could have expected. Jericho Creek's main street was little more than a single dusty thoroughfare lined with clapboard buildings. A few townsfolk peeked out from behind curtains, gossip swirling through the humid afternoon air. Word traveled fast in small towns, and by the time James secured a horse and wagon from the local livery, half the town had likely heard about the disheveled stranger he'd taken under his wing. Liz sat beside him on the wagon seat, her eyes darting to the horizon. She wore a borrowed shawl to shield her from the sun, though it offered little relief. The dry, cracked land stretched in all directions, broken only by distant mesas rising like sun-scorched sentinels. As they drove, James decided to break the silence. Back there, when you were rummaging in the trash, was that your first time doing that? Liz's lip trembled. Yes, she admitted softly. I was desperate. I spent my last cent on a room last night and couldn't find anywhere else to go. James clenched the reins. He couldn't help but feel a stab of anger at Gaffney. Well, you won't be doing that again. The ranch may be humble, but we don't let anyone starve. A flock of crows scattered from a lone cactus as the wagon jolted along the rough trail. Eventually they reached a wide gate with a hanging sign that read, McAllister Ranch. Though modest, the property boasted stables, a blacksmith workshop, and a small cluster of cabins arranged around a main house. The smell of hay and horseflesh blended with the perpetual tang of metal and smoke from the forge. As they pulled up to the main house, James's foreman, Colton Barnes, came out to greet them. A lean man with a sun-baked complexion, Colton tipped his hat politely to Liz. New hand, boss, he asked. This is Elizabeth, Liz, James explained. She's a friend. She'll be staying in one of the spare rooms for now. Colton's eyes flickered with curiosity, but he nodded. Sure thing. I'll see to it. She's got everything she needs. Before James could guide Liz inside, a fiery-haired girl of about 16 burst out of the barn, trailing a swirl of hay behind her. Uncle James, you're back. This was Lucy McAllister, James's niece. She'd been living on the ranch since her parents passed away in a wagon accident years ago, whose she stopped short when she saw Liz. The older woman's disheveled appearance sparked immediate concern. Is she all right? James made introductions. Liz smiled shyly at Lucy's frank curiosity. The girl's open, honest face and immediate warmth reminded Liz of the life she'd lost back east. Within minutes, Lucy had whisked Liz inside, determined to help her freshen up. James watched them go, a strange knot of apprehension and relief swirling in his gut. He hoped bringing Liz here was the right call. Something about her sparked compassion within him. Yes, but also a stirring sense of foreboding he couldn't quite name. That evening, the ranch hands gathered for supper in the big communal dining room of the bunkhouse. Platters of hot cornbread beans, salted pork and roasted vegetables covered the long wooden table. James insisted Liz join them despite her initial hesitation. The men regarded her with a mixture of curiosity and sympathy. Colton raised a mug of beer in a subtle toast, and conversation resumed focusing on topics like the dryness of the season, the next cattle drive, and rumored trouble with a local land baron named Franklin Holcomb. Over the din, Lucy piped up with a conspiratorial whisper directed at Liz. Franklin Holcomb, he owns half the land around here, and he wants the other half too. He's been pressuring Uncle James to sell the ranch for months. Liz looked startled. Why wouldn't he sell? Lucy shrugged. 'Cause Uncle James doesn't believe in giving up your home just for the sake of a quick profit. Holcomb wants to build a railway spur or something, but Uncle James doesn't trust him. Lucy lowered her voice dramatically. They say Holcomb's men do his dirty work in the dark, pressuring folks may be worse. James, overhearing a snippet of the conversation, raised an eyebrow. Lucy, no scaring folks, he admonished gently. Holcomb's just a businessman who thinks money can buy anything. Let's not get carried away. Even so, James couldn't ignore a shudder of unease. Holcomb's proposals were more like ultimatums, and James had heard talk that if persuasion failed, Holcomb wasn't above hiring dangerous guns to enforce his will. Liz noticed the tension flicker across James's features. In that fleeting moment, She wondered if she had escaped one kind of trouble only to land smack dab in the middle of another. 3 weeks passed. In that time, Liz regained her health and some measure of stability. She helped Lucy with the ranch's chores, feeding chickens, collecting eggs, and mending clothes. Her shy nature gradually melted away under the McAllisters' kindness, and a fragile sense of family began to knit them together. One afternoon, while James was pumping water at the well, Liz approached him, a piece of paper clutched in her hand. "I think I found an advertisement for a job in the local paper," she said hesitantly. "A housekeeping position in the next town. That's only a few hours' ride from here, so I could—" James cut her off with a gentle smile. "You don't have to go if you don't want to. You're welcome here as long as you need." The sincerity in his voice was disarming. She stared at him, torn between gratitude and the sense that she was imposing. "I appreciate that more than I can say, James, but I don't want to be a burden." "You're not a burden," he said firmly. "You've been helping around the ranch. Lucy adores you, and—" He paused, cheeks reddening under his tan. "We'd miss you if you left." Liz's heart fluttered in a way she hadn't felt since Gaffney first courted her. But James was different, steady grounded in a decency she'd thought lost to the world. She opened her mouth to respond, but a sudden shout from the main gate interrupted. McAllister. A group of riders appeared, led by a tall man with a commanding presence. He was dressed in crisp black attire, the sun reflecting off polished boots. It was Franklin Holcomb himself, followed by 3 hired guns. James and Liz exchanged glances. Liz's pulse raced. She noticed how James's posture stiffened immediately. Holcomb swung down from his horse, adjusting his vest, before striding forward with a calculated smile. "Afternoon, James," he drawled. "I've come to discuss a matter of business." James wiped his hands on a rag expression, neutral. "Holcomb, you know my terms haven't changed." Holcomb feigned a wounded look. Now, let's not be hasty. I'm prepared to offer you double my last price for this land. You can walk away with enough money to settle anywhere you like, even California. Don't you want to see the ocean, McAllister?" James stood firm. "No price is worth giving up my home. My family built this ranch with their own hands. We're not selling." Holcomb's lips thinned. "I see. And who's this lovely lady?" Before Liz could reply, James replied simply, "This is Elizabeth." Holcomb's hawkish gaze swept over Liz, making her feel like a deer pinned by a predator. A small, unsettling smile curved his mouth. "Elizabeth, is it? Are you James's wife?" A wave of protectiveness surged through James. Without hesitation, and without truly knowing why, he placed a firm hand on Liz's shoulder. "Yes," he said, surprising even himself. "This is my wife." For a heartbeat, time froze. Liz's eyes shot to James's face. Something in his gaze implored her to go along. Holcomb cocked an eyebrow, but quickly recovered. "Well, my congratulations to you both," he said in a hollow tone. "In any case, I'll leave you to it. Let me know if you change your mind about selling McAllister. I'll be at the Jericho Creek Hotel for a few days." With that, Holcomb signaled his men, and they rode off, dust swirling behind them. As soon as they were out of earshot, Liz stepped away from James. "Your wife?" She stared at him, half shocked, half amused. "Where did that come from?" James rubbed the back of his neck sheepishly. "He was sizing you up, and I didn't like it. Calling you my wife was a way to claim you were under my protection. That man doesn't back off easily." Liz's face burned, and for a moment she wasn't sure whether to be offended or grateful. In the end, she exhaled a shaky laugh. Well, guess that's one way to do it. They shared a tense grin, though neither said it. Both wondered if this lie would cost them dearly in the days to come. News traveled faster than a bullet in Jericho Creek. Within a day, everyone had heard that James McAllister introduced Elizabeth as his wife. Mama Myrtle, always ready with fresh gossip, cornered James in the saloon when he came to buy supplies. How could you get married without telling anyone? Especially me, who's known you since you were in diapers. She planted her hands on her ample hips, her face full of mock outrage. James cleared his throat. It was sudden. From across the saloon, Wyatt Earp, still in town, sorting out a rowdy gambler in the local jail, gave James a curious look. He lifted his glass in a silent toast, as if acknowledging a secret. For a moment, James wished the floor would swallow him. That evening after chores, he and Liz finally had a chance to talk privately in the dimly lit living room of the main house. A single oil lamp burned on the table between them, casting shadows that danced on the walls. Liz clasped her hands together. We can't keep lying to everyone. Eventually the truth will come out. James nodded, removing his hat and setting it aside. I know. I just didn't trust Holcomb not to harass you. And rumor has it he's got a real hankering for any pretty woman new to town. At least this way you're off limits. Liz stared at the flickering flame in the oil lamp, remembering Holcomb's cold stare. I appreciate your concern, James, but I don't want to cause you trouble. I can pack my things. James cut her off. No, it's not trouble. In fact, he sighed. I'm not the best at fancy talk, but maybe being my wife for real wouldn't be such a bad idea. You need protection. I could use help on the ranch. And he swallowed hard, meeting her eyes. I like having you around. Liz felt her heart pound so loudly it seemed to echo in the quiet room. She hadn't expected this. Yes, James was kind, and yes, they'd grown close. But marriage? Are you sure? She whispered. We've only known each other a few weeks. James's face reflected his own turmoil. I know, but out here folks don't have the luxury of long courtships. We do what we must. I won't push you. It's your decision. Silence hung heavily in the air, broken only by the distant low of a cow from the corral. Finally, Liz nodded slowly. Let's think it over. Let's give it a bit of time before we decide. A sense of relief washed over James. Of course, but neither of them knew that events were already spiraling beyond their control, just when Liz began to believe her life might be settling. The past came roaring back like a runaway stagecoach. One sultry afternoon, as she helped Lucy gather eggs, a stranger rode up to the ranch. From the window, James watched the rider approach instantly, recognizing the slick mustache and crooked grin. Vernon Gaffney, Liz's former fiancé, if he could be called that, dismounted with the practiced swagger of a gambler. He surveyed the property, eyes lighting with greed. James stepped out onto the porch, arms crossed. James McAllister, right. Gaffney called, tipping his hat. Heard you're the man who rescued my beloved Elizabeth. Before James could answer, Gaffney winked and added, and I'm mighty grateful. Now where is my fiancé? Rage simmered under James's calm exterior. He knew Gaffney was playing the charmer. She's not your fiancé, James said evenly, and you should keep riding, friend. Gaffney feigned a look of hurt. Now that's no way to treat a man who's simply come to collect what's his. James took a step down from the porch, fists clenched. Elizabeth is no man's property. She's free to choose where she wants to be. Gaffney shrugged. Suit yourself. Let me see her. Behind James, the door opened, and Liz emerged. Her face lost all colour at the sight of Gaffney. She clutched at the doorframe as memories of betrayal flooded back. You left me with nothing, she managed. A fleeting flash of regret crossed Gaffney's features, but it vanished as quickly as a gambler's winning hand. Darling, I needed time to gather funds. It was all for us. He paused, eyeing James suspiciously. Word around town is that you've married this blacksmith. Liz's pulse roared in her ears. She glanced at James, then back to Gaffney. James has offered me more kindness in a month than you ever did. I'm not leaving. Gaffney's grin twisted into a sneer. He looked at James. We'll see about that. Liz, sweet thing, I've got business in Jericho Creek for a spell. I'll give you time to reconsider. If you stay with him, you'll miss out on the good life I can offer. James took a deliberate step forward. I believe the lady's made her choice. Gaffney raised his hands, feigning innocence. All right, all right. No need for violence. He tugged on his horse's reins, throwing one final taunt over his shoulder. But you'll regret this, both of you. As he rode off, the tension in the air felt so thick it could have been cut with a knife. Liz trembled, tears of anger spilling down her cheeks. James put a hand on her shoulder. Don't pay him any mind, he said softly. He can't hurt you here. But James couldn't shake the sense of dread building in his chest. Gaffney was a snake, and snakes had a way of coming back to strike when least expected. Unbeknownst to James and Liz, Gaffney made a beeline for Jericho Creek's finest hotel, where none other than Franklin Holcomb was also staying. They found themselves in the same corner of the plush lobby, a swirl of cigar smoke drifting in the air. Holcomb narrowed his eyes at Gaffney. You lost, friend? Gaffney smiled as though he'd been waiting for this meeting. Not at all. I hear you're a man of means, Holcomb, and you've got something I might want influence. Holcomb studied Gaffney for a moment. Speak your piece. Gaffney's tone dripped with smug confidence. There's a certain woman at McAllister Ranch who belongs with me, and you want McAllister out of your way, so you can buy his land. Holcomb gestured for Gaffney to sit in a nearby armchair, an intrigued expression crossing his face. Go on. In hushed tones they conspired. Gaffney wanted Liz back either by sweet words or by force. Holcomb wanted the ranch. If they joined forces, they might break James's resolve. Gaffney could torment Liz or threaten the ranch in a way that left James no choice but to sell. Or maybe Liz herself would beg James to sell if it meant protecting her from Gaffney's legal claims. Holcomb sipped a glass of whiskey as he listened. So you claim to be her rightful fiancé. Do you have documents to prove it? Gaffney reached into his coat pocket, withdrawing a tattered letter. She signed this in St. Elmer, naming me her intended. That, plus the statement of a local pastor who officiated a promise ceremony, might be enough in a frontier court. Holcomb gave a tight smile. Courts can be swayed for the right price. Their conversation ended with a handshake. Two unscrupulous men united by greed. The stage was set for a confrontation that would either destroy James and Liz or forge something stronger than any of them expected. Tension simmered like a pot of stew left too long on the fire. Over the next few days, ominous signs made James and his ranch hands uneasy. A few fence posts were torn down. A barn window was shot out in the dead of night. No one got hurt. But the message was clear. We can reach you whenever we want. Lucy stuck close to Liz, the girl sensing Liz's unease. One night, while James paced on the porch, Lucy approached him. We have to do something, she urged. He patted her shoulder, though worry lined his face. I know. I'm thinking about hiring some extra guns at least until this threat passes. Liz overheard this from the doorway. I don't want anyone getting hurt because of me, she said, voice trembling. James turned to her, calm and resolute. No one's going to get hurt if I can help it. But the very next morning, Holcomb himself arrived in a fancy buggy escorted by 2 guards. He parked near the ranch house with a showy air of entitlement. Liz stood on the porch beside James as Holcomb climbed down, dressed in a crisp, dark suit despite the desert heat. McAllister Holcomb began removing his gloves. I've come to make one final offer. Triple my previous price for your ranch. More than fair, I'd say. James met Holcomb's gaze unwaveringly. My answer remains the same. Holcomb tilted his head, a patronizing smile curving his lips. You have a wife now, I hear. Might be wise to consider her future. The West is no place for a lady if trouble comes knocking. Liz bristled. We're fine where we are, thank you, she said, forcing politeness. Holcomb let out a small chuckle. Very well. But there are certain complications. My associate Vernon Gaffney claims Miss Elizabeth. Pardon me. Mrs. McAllister is not legally your wife. He has documentation suggesting a prior engagement which could leave you in a precarious position. James and Liz exchanged alarmed looks. Holcomb noticed and pressed on. Seems to me if you sign over this ranch, we can make all your problems disappear. Gaffney is willing to relinquish his claim on your lady for a small portion of the ranch's sale. Everyone wins. James's fists clenched at his sides, his voice quivering with anger. Get off my land. Holcomb's eyes flickered with cold amusement. He replaced his gloves, climbed back into his buggy. You have until sundown tomorrow to consider. I'd hate for any unfortunate incidents to befall your happy home. With that, Holcomb and his guards departed, leaving a suffocating tension in their wake. Gathering his most trusted ranch hands, Colton and a few others, James began to plan. He refused to give in, but Holcomb's threat was real. Even Lucy, plucky as she was, looked scared. Liz felt torn by guilt. Maybe we should leave. I could go with Gaffney just to spare you, she blurted. But James stopped her with a fierce shake of his head. No, you're not going with that snake. And I'm not selling. We'll stand our ground. That night, while Lucy bunked in a safe corner of the main house, James and Liz sat beside the fireplace. Shadows flickered across their weary faces. Liz bit her lip. I've made my decision. I want to marry you. Properly. If you'll have me. James's eyes widened. Despite all the threats swirling around them, a tender warmth spread through his chest. He reached for her hand. Nothing would make me happier. They decided to speak to the local preacher at dawn, hoping to secure a wedding certificate that no one could contest. But as the first rays of morning light crept over the horizon, events took a darker turn. Before James and Liz could ride to town, a commotion echoed from the stables. Lucy, who'd awakened early, sprinted back into the house, her face pale. Uncle James, it's Gaffney. He's taken one of the horses and threatened the stable boy. He's demanding to see Liz. James grabbed his shotgun, heart thundering. Liz, determined not to be a damsel in distress, marched alongside him toward the stables. They found Gaffney swaggering around with a cocky grin, his hand resting near the pistol on his belt. "I told you I'd be back." "Liz," he drawled. "Now step aside, McAllister. She's comin' with me." Liz's face twisted with anger. "Never." Gaffney nodded slowly. "Guess we do this the hard way." He lunged, grabbing Liz's arm. She cried out, struggling, while James raised his shotgun. But Gaffney pivoted, using Liz as a shield. "Shoot me and you'll hit her," he sneered. For a split second, the standoff seemed hopeless. But Lucy, with a courage born of desperation, grabbed a pitchfork and rushed Gaffney from behind. He spun too late. The pitchfork's tines grazed his arm, causing him to yelp and lose his grip on Liz. James seized the moment, slamming the butt of his shotgun into Gaffney's shoulder, sending him sprawling. The stable boy darted forward to snatch Gaffney's pistol from the ground. Panting, James towered over Gaffney. Shotgun pointed at the man's chest. "Next time you lay a hand on her," he hissed, "you won't walk away." Cursing under his breath, Gaffney scrambled back, blood seeping from his arm. "You'll regret this, McAllister," he spat, eyes flicking between James and Liz. "You both will." He turned and fled, vanishing into the dusty dawn. Liz collapsed against James, tears of shock and relief staining her cheeks. Lucy hovered nearby, pitchfork still in hand, her own hands shaking. James put an arm around both of them. "This ends now," he said. "We're going to the preacher. We'll make this marriage official. And then if Gaffney or Holcomb try any more stunts, we'll show them the law's on our side." Liz nodded through trembling lips. Neither she nor James realized just how far Holcomb would go to get what he wanted. Late that morning, James, Liz, and Lucy drove into Jericho Creek. Word had spread of Gaffney's scuffle at the ranch, and folks were on edge. When they arrived at the small church, the Reverend Josiah Clark greeted them with a gentle smile. "So you two wish to be wed?" he asked kindly, guiding them inside the modest chapel with its simple wooden benches and stained glass windows. The air smelled of candle wax and old hymnals. "Yes," Liz said, clasping James's hand. "As soon as possible." The Reverend nodded. "I can perform a ceremony right now, if you're—" Before he could finish, the church door slammed open, revealing two lawmen flanking Gaffney. One was the town's deputy Jonah Smith, and the other was a county marshal named Elijah Turner. Gaffney pointed an accusing finger at Liz. "That's the woman who broke a legal engagement contract with me," Gaffney declared. "She stole from me and ran off. I want her arrested or detained until we settle this in court." Shock rippled through the chapel. James stepped forward, fury blazing in his eyes. "That's a lie." Holcomb entered behind them, adjusting his coat with a smug expression. "I have documentation." "Reverend," he said smoothly, handing over a sheaf of papers. "It appears Ms. Elizabeth Cassidy entered into a binding agreement with Mr. Gaffney here. A promise ceremony was performed in St. Elmer, witnessed by an ordained pastor. This marriage you intend to perform would be considered bigamy." Liz's eyes widened, panic clawing at her chest. The Reverend scanned the documents, brows furrowed. This complicates matters," he said quietly. James tore the papers from the Reverend's hands. "This is nonsense. She never agreed to anything binding. Gaffney abandoned her with no money, no provisions." Holcomb raised an eyebrow. Nevertheless, if the county marshal here deems this contract valid, Ms. Cassidy cannot legally wed until the court resolves the dispute. Unless, of course, you are willing to drop this matter entirely by relinquishing your claim on Ms. Cassidy and that ranch of yours to a more suitable buyer. The deputy, Jonah Smith, looked uneasy. We don't want trouble, McAllister. Best to let the court handle this. He glanced at Liz with an apologetic look. Ms. Cassidy, I'm afraid you'll have to come with us. We'll keep you under protective custody until the judge arrives in a few days. Liz's face went pale. No, please, this isn't fair. James spun to Gaffney, fists clenched. You scum. You talk about law, but you left her to die. Gaffney sniffed. It's her word against mine, and I've got a piece of paper. That's all the law needs out here. Lucy let out a sob. The deputy moved forward, gently but firmly guiding Liz toward the door. James looked like a caged animal, torn between tearing Gaffney apart and abiding by the law he'd always respected. Don't worry, Liz whispered to James, tears filling her eyes. We'll figure this out. And with that, she was taken away, leaving James, standing in the aisle of the church, breath coming in ragged gasps. Holcomb and Gaffney shared a triumphant smirk before exiting. Reverend Clark placed a trembling hand on James's shoulder. We'll pray for justice, my son. James's gaze was fixed on the open door through which Liz had been led away. Every fiber of his being screamed to go after her. But for now, the law's cold grip had intervened. With Liz in the custody of the local law, James steeled himself for a fight. He strode into the sheriff's office only to find that Sheriff Clay Harden was out on a manhunt for some cattle rustlers. In his place, the deputy seemed sympathetic, yet bound by duty. James demanded a visiting pass. The deputy nodded, allowing him to speak to Liz through the iron bars of the small holding cell at the back of the office. Liz sat on a cot, tears smudging her cheeks, but she managed a small smile when she saw James. I'm so sorry for this mess, she whispered. James shook his head. You didn't cause this, Gaffney, and Holcomb did. I'll find a way to prove that contract is bogus. He explained he'd send for Wyatt Earp, who was still in town, hoping the famed lawman might have connections. Meanwhile, Lucy and Colton would scour St. Elmer for the pastor who performed the so-called promise ceremony. Perhaps they could prove Gaffney had bribed him or tricked him. Liz gripped James's hands through the bars. Be careful. Holcomb won't give up easily. James pressed a kiss to her fingers, heart aching. Neither will I. Outside Jonah Smith, the deputy approached James with a quiet apology. I hate doing this, McAllister, but the law's the law. We'll keep her safe at least. James nodded stiffly. I appreciate it. But if Gaffney or Holcomb try anything, you'd better be ready. Jonah gave a grim nod. I'll do my best. James left the office with a resolve as solid as the steel he forged. He had a plan, and with Lucy's help, he aimed to unravel Gaffney's lies before Holcomb could force his hand. Wyatt Earp wasn't one to meddle in local disputes, but he was a man of principle who despised cheats. When James found him sipping whiskey in Mama Myrtle's saloon that night, he explained the situation. Earp's grey eyes narrowed. I knew Gaffney was slick. Heard rumours of him forging legal documents before he said, setting his glass down. I'll see what I can do. They decided the quickest way to put pressure on Gaffney was to confront him publicly, and they'd find him at Holcomb's side. Sure enough, that evening, the pair were holed up in the Jericho Creek Hotel lounge, entertaining travelling associates with cigars and brandy. James walked in with Wyatt Earp by his side, and the lounge fell silent. Holcomb looked up, one eyebrow arched. Gaffney tensed. "Well, if it isn't Mr. McAllister," Holcomb drawled. "Come to accept my offer." James stepped forward. Fists clenched. "You release Liz right now, or so help me." Earp placed a cautionary hand on James's shoulder. Then he addressed Gaffney. "Heard talk you forged a contract to lay claim to a woman who no longer wants you. I know a bit about forgeries. You'd better hope this stands up under scrutiny, Gaffney." Holcomb chuckled. "Marshal Earp is it I've heard of your reputation, but this is a simple civil matter. None of your business, truly." Wyatt Earp leveled a steely gaze at Holcomb. "I don't take kindly to forced arrangements. The only reason the law's hearing this is your deep pockets and Gaffney's shady papers. If you or your men step outside the bounds of that law, you'll find me waiting." Holcomb's companions bristled hands drifting toward their guns. But Holcomb raised a placating hand. "No need for violence. We'll see what the judge says when he arrives in 2 days." James glared at Gaffney. "We've sent for the pastor in St. Elmer. If he testifies you bribed him, you're finished." A flicker of alarm crossed Gaffney's face before he recovered his smug grin. "Good luck with that." Earp kept a measured stare. "We'll see who luck favors." The tension in the room crackled like a rattlesnake ready to strike. James wanted nothing more than to pummel Gaffney until he begged for mercy, but he knew that might only worsen Liz's predicament. So he turned on his heel and strode out, Earp close behind. "Be ready," McAllister, Earp warned quietly. "Men like Holcomb don't wait around for the law if they think they can cheat it first." James's mouth set in a grim line. "I'll be ready." Daylight brought no relief. The judge was scheduled to arrive in Jericho Creek in 48 hours. If the judge ruled Gaffney's contract valid, Liz might be forced into Gaffney's custody, or James might have to pay a hefty settlement that could cost him the ranch. As night fell, James had his ranch hands on full alert. Lucy was hidden in a secure part of the house. Colton patrolled with a rifle, while a couple of other men took turns scouting the perimeter. James barely slept, tension coiling in his muscles. Around midnight, the stillness broke. Shots rang out from the corral. James leapt from his bed, grabbed his revolver and rifle, and rushed outside. By the lantern's feeble glow, he saw shadows moving near the horses. Sparks lit the darkness as muzzle flashes illuminated masked figures. One ranch hand was down, groaning. Another fired wildly, trying to drive off the intruders. James aimed and squeezed the trigger, sending a bullet zinging past one of the raiders, who cursed and scrambled for cover. Amid the chaos, James spotted Holcomb himself, identifiable by his tall silhouette and the glint of a silver buckle. The land baron fired a warning shot into the air, bellowing, "Sell or lose everything." McAllister. James ducked behind a water trough, returning fire. "Coward! Show your face." Holcomb's men set fire to a stack of hay bales, the flames roaring high into the night sky. James cursed, hearing the terrified whinny of horses. The blaze threatened to engulf the stable. James dashed toward it, ignoring bullets whizzing past. He managed to untie the frightened horses, slapping their rumps to run them free. Meanwhile, Colton and the other hands kept up a steady barrage of gunfire. Holcomb's men began to retreat, but not before one of them fired a parting shot that sliced across James's left arm, drawing blood. With a hiss of pain, James crouched, returning a final volley. In the eerie orange glow of the flames, he saw Holcomb mount a horse and gallop away, shouting, "I'll see you at daybreak, with a signed deed, or your ranch will burn again," And worse, moments later, the raiders were gone. Colton ran up, breath ragged. "Boss, you're hit." James pressed a hand to the bleeding graze on his arm. "I'll live. We need to put out that fire." It took over an hour, but they finally doused the flames. 2 ranch hands were wounded, though not critically. The stables were scorched, and supplies were destroyed. James stood in the wreckage smoke, stinging his eyes. Holcomb had made his ultimatum painfully clear, and Liz was still locked away in the sheriff's cells, powerless to help. By mid-morning, Lucy returned from St. Elmer with news she'd found the pastor Gaffney claimed had officiated the promise ceremony. The pastor, Reverend Barnaby Cross, rode into Jericho Creek at Lucy's side, visibly agitated. Once Lucy explained the situation, the Reverend was appalled that his name was being used to enforce a fraudulent claim. In the sheriff's office, James Wyatt Earp and the deputy listened as Reverend Cross recounted the truth. "Mr. Gaffney asked me to bless his engagement, but Ms. Cassidy was not present at the time," he said, adjusting his spectacles. "It was a simple prayer session. No formal contract was signed in my presence. If he produced a document with my signature, it's a forgery." Deputy Jonah Smith let out a breath of relief. "That's the proof we need." He excused himself to fetch the county marshal. Moments later, the marshal arrived with Gaffney Holcomb and a handful of curious onlookers. Gaffney wore his usual smug grin, but it faltered at the sight of Reverend Cross. The pastor pointed an accusing finger. "You lied in my name, sir." Gaffney tried to sputter a defense, but the deputy and marshal wasted no time. They compared Gaffney's documents to the pastor's official record book. The signatures didn't match. The whole contract was deemed void. Holcomb's lips pressed into a thin line. "This is outrageous. I paid good money for those." He caught himself, but the slip was enough to confirm the suspicion that he'd financed Gaffney's scheme. Wyatt Earp gave a curt nod to the marshal. "Seems we have conspiracy to commit fraud." Gaffney's face burned with anger. "This isn't over," he hissed, but the marshal stepped forward, slapping handcuffs on Gaffney. "Oh, it is for now, friend. You're under arrest on suspicion of forgery and fraud." Holcomb backed away, seeing his ally taken down. "I had no idea these documents were falsified," he said smoothly, though no one believed him. "I'm an innocent victim here." James glowered. "Innocent? You raided my ranch last night." Holcomb lifted his chin. "I was at the hotel all night. If my men acted on their own, I can't be held responsible." He turned to leave. "I'll be speaking to my lawyer about slander McAllister." With that, Holcomb stormed out, a swirl of tension following him. Gaffney was locked up, and Liz was free at last. The moment Liz stepped out of the cell, she ran into James's arms. He held her tight, ignoring the throbbing pain in his wounded arm. "It's over," she murmured, voice trembling. James pressed a soft kiss to her forehead. Gaffney might be handled, but Holcomb's still out there. "We need to be on our guard." Liz nodded, relief and apprehension warring in her chest. At least the immediate threat, her false engagement, had been dismantled. But Holcomb's greed was a force yet to be reckoned with. With Gaffney's lie exposed, the path was finally clear for James and Liz to marry. The stench of smoke still lingered at the ranch, and several structures needed repair. But the sense of renewed hope was palpable. They chose to hold the ceremony in the small church in Jericho Creek, with Reverend Josiah Clark officiating and Reverend Barnaby Cross present as a witness, both men eager to ensure no further deception marred the couple's happiness. Word spread, and half the town turned out to witness the surprising nuptials. Mama Myrtle arrived in her Sunday best, tears glimmering in her eyes. Lucy stood at Liz's side as a bridesmaid wearing a borrowed blue dress. Colton and the other ranch hands took positions near James' proud smiles on their faces. When Liz walked down the simple aisle, wearing a dress Mama Myrtle had helped stitch together, James felt his breath catch. She looked radiant, despite the hardships they'd endured. He saw not the woman digging through trash weeks ago, but a strong, resilient soul who had touched his heart in ways he hadn't thought possible. Reverend Clark's voice echoed in the hushed chapel we gather here to join James McAllister and Elizabeth Cassidy in holy matrimony. Liz's hand trembled as James took it. He gazed into her eyes, seeing all the uncertainty, the pain, and the courage that brought them here. In that moment, the outside world fell away. The threats, the burned stables, the swirling rumors, none of it mattered compared to this bond. "Do you, James, take Elizabeth to be your lawfully wedded wife?" asked the Reverend. "I do," James answered, voice steady. "And do you, Elizabeth, take James to be your lawfully wedded husband?" She smiled through tears. "I do." The Reverend's smile crinkled his eyes. "By the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride." A ripple of applause and cheers filled the chapel as James and Liz sealed their vows with a tender kiss. Outside, Lucy wiped tears from her cheeks, and even the ranch hands doffed their hats in respect. In that moment, they were no longer two strangers bound by chance. They were a family forging a new future. Peace was short-lived. Less than a week after the wedding, rumors circulated that Holcomb intended to press criminal charges against James for defamation and harboring a fugitive. Most people saw through the ruse, but Holcomb's wealth could buy crooked lawyers and judges. James prepared to stand trial if necessary, but Wyatt Earp, about to leave town, offered some parting words of wisdom. "Sometimes you have to face a bully head-on. You do that, McAllister, and you do it by the law. If he tries something else, well, justice might have to be swift." Holcomb indeed tried something else. Late one night, he sent a small army of hired guns to Jericho Creek. They riled up the saloon, looking for a fight. In the chaos, they planned to corner James, or one of his close allies, and teach him a lesson. But Jericho Creek was not a lawless place. The deputy Jonah Smith got wind of the plan and organized a posse. By the time Holcomb's hired thugs arrived, they found themselves outnumbered and outgunned. Wyatt Earp was still in town finishing a final piece of business, and he joined the posse pistol in hand, gaze cold as steel. A furious gunfight erupted on the main street under the flicker of lantern light. On one side, Holcomb's men, desperate to earn their pay. On the other, the deputy Earp, James, and every able-bodied man from the ranch and town who'd had enough of Holcomb's terror. Shots rang out, windows shattered, people dove for cover. Holcomb himself watched from the safety of his buggy at the edge of town, seething as he realized the tide had turned against him. Earp's pistol barked, dropping a hired gun, who aimed at James. The deputy swung his rifle butt into another thug, knocking him senseless. James fired carefully, taking down two who tried to flank Colton. Within minutes, Holcomb's men were subdued or driven off. The survivors fled into the desert night, leaving Holcomb scowling as he realized his scheme had failed. When Earp James and the others approached, Holcomb raised his hands. "Call off your dogs," Holcomb snarled, sweat beading his forehead. "I was only protecting my property interests." Earp's laugh was cold. "You're under arrest for inciting violence, Holcomb." Holcomb's bravado faltered. He considered reaching for a hidden derringer in his vest, but James's gun was already trained on him. Gritting his teeth, he allowed the deputy to cuff him. His empire of intimidation had crumbled. As the night wore on, lanterns cast warm light over the gathering at the Yellow Moon Saloon. Children dozed in their parents' laps, and the townsfolk shared laughter instead of fear. Liz found herself seated beside Mama Myrtle, who squeezed her hand and whispered, "You've given this town more hope than you know." James stood near the doorway, watching the people he once quietly served, now raising glasses in his honor. He caught Liz's gaze and smiled the kind of smile that said, "We made it." Later, under a blanket of stars, James and Liz returned to the ranch. Lucy was fast asleep in the wagon bed, wrapped in a borrowed quilt. Liz leaned into James as they rode in silence, the clopping of hooves steady and sure. "Feels like the world's different now," Liz murmured. James nodded. "It is, because you're in it with me." And that was all that needed to be said. Weeks after the dust settled, the McAllister Ranch thrived once more. Burned stables were rebuilt, fences stood firm, and the land began to flourish again. Liz awoke each day to prairie sunrises and the steady rhythm of ranch life. A far cry from the desperate girl scavenging outside a saloon. She learned blacksmithing beside James, her hands roughened by honest work, and her heart softened by the peace they'd fought for. Lucy affectionately called her Aunt Liz, and the ranch hands treated her as kin. Even Mama Myrtle visited often, always retelling the tale of how Liz found love, safety, and a name. Gaffney remained behind bars. Holcomb faced a crumbling empire. The threat was gone for now. One evening, Liz and James walked hand in hand across the Golden Plains. "I never imagined a place like this could feel like home," she whispered. James stopped brushing wind-blown hair from her face. "You didn't just find home, you built it." As the sun dipped below the hills, they kissed, quiet, tender, certain. The frontier remained wild and unpredictable, but their story had carved out something rare. A love forged from grit, resilience, and one man's decision to offer a stranger hope. A lone tumbleweed rolls across the dusty street, a gentle reminder that in the Wild West, even the harshest landscape can give way to a story of hope, courage, and unwavering devotion. James and Liz's tale isn't just about survival. It's about forging bonds stronger than steel in a world that tests every fiber of your being. From the moment he found her digging in the trash to the clang of gunfire echoing through the night, their path was paved with trials that sharpened their determination. And in the end, love and integrity prevailed over greed and deceit. If you've been captivated by this journey, by the tension, the triumph, and the unwavering power of loyalty, then please show your support. Like this video, share it with friends who crave a good Wild West drama, and subscribe to our channel for more riveting stories from the frontier and beyond. After all, every tale deserves a listening ear and a new beginning.